The plasma cannon fire lit up the void like angry stars, each blast sending shockwaves through the hull of the UES Defiance. Captain Sarah Chen gripped her command chair as another volley struck their starboard shields, the energy barriers flickering dangerously close to failure. "Shield strength down to 30%, shouted Lieutenant Rodriguez from the tactical station, his voice barely audible over the screaming alarms. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 9. Chen's jaw tightened as she watched the tactical display. 3 Korthak heavy cruisers had emerged from the asteroid field without warning, their sleek black hulls bristling with weapons that far outclassed anything the human exploration vessel carried. The ambush had been perfectly executed, catching the Defiance while conducting routine surveys of the Sigma Draconis system. "Return fire with everything we have," Chen ordered, knowing even as she spoke that their light pulse cannons would barely scratch the alien warships. The Defiance was a science vessel equipped for discovery, not warfare. "And get me a quantum comm link to Earth Command, Priority Alpha." The ship shuddered again as enemy fire found its mark. Through the viewport, Chen could see debris spinning away from their hull, pieces of human engineering scattered like confetti against the star field. The Korthak ships moved with predatory grace, their weapons systems cycling with mechanical precision. Communications Officer Park looked up from her station, sweat beading on her forehead. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from all 3 enemy vessels. They're charging some kind of primary weapon." Chen felt ice in her veins. She'd read the intelligence reports about Korthak plasma lances, weapons capable of cutting through a starship's hull like paper. If they fired those weapons at the same time, the Defiance would be vaporized in seconds. "Quantum link established with Earth Command," Park announced. "Admiral Morrison on the line." The holographic display flickered to life, showing the weathered face of Admiral James Morrison, his expression grim even across the impossible distance. "Captain Chen, report. We're under attack by 3 Korthak heavy cruisers in the Sigma Draconis system," Chen said quickly, ducking as sparks flew from an overloaded console. "Ambush situation. They caught us during survey operations. We're severely outgunned." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Casualties?" 14 dead, 37 wounded. We can't hold out much longer, sir. Requesting immediate assistance." "Understood, Captain. Help is on the way. You just need to survive for—" Morrison glanced at something off-screen. 6 hours. 6 hours. Chen felt her heart sink. The Defiance wouldn't last 6 minutes against those plasma lances, let alone 6 hours, but she kept her voice steady. "Acknowledged, Admiral. We'll do our best." The connection ended, leaving Chen staring at the tactical display. The 3 Korthak ships had formed a triangle around the Defiance, their weapons slowly tracking like the eyes of predators. She could almost feel their alien commanders savoring the moment, prolonging the hunt. "All hands, this is the captain," Chen announced over the ship's comm system. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Engineering, I need everything you can give me. Tactical, target their sensor arrays. If we can blind them, maybe we can buy some time." The next few hours became a desperate dance of survival. The Defiance twisted and spun through space, using the asteroid field as cover while the Korthak ships methodically hunted them down. Every maneuver bought them precious minutes. Every successful hit on an enemy sensor cluster extended their lives a little longer. But the aliens were patient, and they were learning. Each time the Defiance found a hiding spot among the asteroids, the enemy adapted their search patterns. Each time the human ship tried a new evasive tactic, the Korthak vessels countered it more effectively. By the 4th hour, half the crew was dead or wounded. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in hellish red, and the smell of smoke and ozone filled the recycled air. Chen's uniform was torn and blood-stained, her left arm hanging useless from a piece of shrapnel that had torn through her shoulder. "Captain," Rodriguez called out, his voice hoarse from breathing the acrid air. "I'm reading movement from the Korthak vessels. They're closing in on our position." Chen nodded grimly. They'd been hiding behind a particularly large asteroid for the past 20 minutes, trying to repair their damaged engines. But the hiding spot had been temporary at best, and now their time was up. "How long until the engines are back online?" she asked engineering. "Another 10 minutes at least," came the reply through the comm. "The plasma conduits are completely fried." 10 minutes they didn't have. Chen could see on the tactical display as the 3 enemy ships moved into position, preparing to flush them out with concentrated fire. The asteroid that sheltered them would provide no protection against a coordinated assault. "Captain," Park said suddenly, her voice filled with excitement, "I'm picking up something on the long-range sensors. Multiple contacts, bearing 27 Mark IV." Chen felt a flicker of hope. Identification. Park's fingers flew over her console, trying to clean up the sensor readings through the electromagnetic interference from the ongoing battle. Signal pattern matches. Human vessels, Captain. Multiple human vessels. "How many?" "I'm counting. 12, 15. No, wait." Park's eyes widened as more contacts appeared on her screen. "Captain, there are at least 30 ships out there, and they're moving fast." The hope in Chen's chest began to grow. Earth Command had promised help, but she'd expected maybe a single patrol vessel or a light cruiser. 30 ships suggested something much more significant, possibly an entire battle group. Range and time to intercept. Approximately 40,000 kilometers in closing. At their current speed, they'll be here in... Park paused, double-checking her calculations. 3 minutes. 3 minutes? Chen felt a grim smile cross her face. After 4 hours of running and hiding, knowing that rescue was only 3 minutes away felt like a miracle. Now they just had to survive long enough for help to arrive. "All stations hold positions," Chen ordered. "Reinforcements are incoming, we just need to." The ship lurched violently as a plasma lance struck their hiding place, the asteroid exploding in a shower of superheated rock and metal. The Korthak had found them, and they weren't waiting any longer. "Evasive maneuvers," Chen shouted as the Defiance shot out from behind the disintegrating asteroid. "All power to engines." The 3 enemy ships immediately opened fire, their weapons tracking the fleeing human vessel. Plasma bolts and particle beams crisscrossed the space around the Defiance, some missing by meters, others striking the already damaged hull. "Shields are gone," Rodriguez reported. "Hull integrity down to 40%. Chen gripped her chair as another hit sent shockwaves through the ship. She could hear the groaning of stressed metal, the sound of a ship being torn apart by forces beyond its design limits. But they were so close to rescue now, so close to survival. 2 minutes, Park called out. "Reinforcements in 2 minutes." Another plasma lance struck near the bridge, and Chen felt the deck plates buckle beneath her feet. Sparks flew from every console, and the lights flickered ominously. The Defiance was dying around them, but it was holding together through sheer determination and the skill of its crew. 1 minute. The tactical display showed the approaching human vessels more clearly now, their energy signatures burning bright against the darkness of space. Chen counted the contacts again, hardly believing what she was seeing. Not 30 ships, but more, many more. "Captain," Park said, her voice filled with awe, I'm reading over 100 human vessels, and some of these energy signatures, Captain, these aren't regular fleet ships. These are reading as Dreadnought-class vessels." Dreadnoughts? Chen felt her breath catch in her throat. Humanity had only built a dozen dreadnoughts in the past century, massive warships designed to project power across interstellar distances. They were the most advanced, most heavily armed vessels in human space, and Earth Command had apparently sent them all. 30 seconds. The Korthak ships suddenly changed their attack pattern, their weapons swiveling away from the crippled Defiance to focus on the approaching human fleet. Clearly, their sensors had detected the same massive energy signatures, and they were preparing for a real fight. Chen watched the tactical display with growing excitement as the human reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace in a coordinated formation. The lead vessels were indeed dreadnoughts, their massive hulls bristling with weapon systems that dwarfed anything the Korthak ships carried. Behind them came heavy cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels, all arranged in perfect battle formation. "This is Admiral Morrison aboard the UES Retribution," came a voice over the comm system. "Captain Chen, withdraw to a safe distance. We'll handle things from here." Chen felt tears of relief streaming down her face as the Defiance limped away from the battle zone, carried by her brave crew to safety. Behind them, over 100 human warships prepared to engage 3 alien vessels that had thought they were facing easy prey. The Korthak had been hunting what they believed was a helpless exploration ship. Instead, they had triggered the arrival of the most powerful military force humanity had ever assembled. As the first human weapons opened fire, lighting up the void with deadly purpose, Chen realized that the aliens had made a terrible mistake. They had anticipated reinforcements. What they got was retribution. Admiral James Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the tactical display. The three Korthak heavy cruisers that had been terrorizing the Defiance now seemed pitifully small against the backdrop of humanity's assembled might. 127 vessels had answered the call, from massive dreadnoughts to nimble destroyers, all arranged in perfect battle formation. "Fleet status report," Morrison commanded, his voice calm despite the magnitude of the moment. This was the largest human fleet ever assembled, representing decades of military buildup and technological advancement. "All ships report ready for combat, Admiral," replied his tactical officer, Commander Hayes. "Dreadnoughts Retribution, Vengeance, and Indomitable are in primary formation. Support vessels are in assigned positions. We have complete sensor lock on all three enemy vessels." Morrison nodded, studying the alien ships on the display. The Korthak were known throughout the galaxy as ruthless conquerors, their technology feared by dozens of civilizations. Their sleek black hulls were covered in weapon emplacements, their ships designed purely for war and domination. But today they faced something different. Today they faced humanity unleashed. "Open a channel to the enemy vessels," Morrison ordered. "Let's see if they're interested in surrender." The communications officer worked at her station for several moments before looking up. "No response, Admiral. They're not acknowledging our hails." "Typical," Morrison muttered. The Korthak rarely communicated with what they considered inferior species, preferring to express themselves through violence. "Very well. All ships prepare to engage. Target their weapons systems first. I want them disabled, not destroyed." The order rippled through the fleet as targeting computers locked onto the alien vessels. The lead dreadnought's massive rail cannons rotated slowly, their barrel assemblies cycling through pre-firing sequences that would accelerate tungsten projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Behind them, the heavy cruisers charged their particle beam arrays, while the destroyers armed their torpedo tubes with fusion warheads. "Admiral," Hayes called out, "the Korthak vessels are moving. They're attempting to break orbit and flee the system." Morrison watched as the three enemy ships suddenly accelerated, their engines flaring brilliant blue as they tried to escape the trap they'd wandered into. Their formation broke apart as each captain chose his own escape vector, desperation overriding military discipline. "Pursuit vectors to all vessels," Morrison commanded. "Don't let them reach the hyperspace limit. If even one of them escapes, they'll report our fleet's strength to their commanders." The human fleet responded instantly, the massive dreadnoughts accelerating with surprising grace for vessels of their size. The destroyer squadrons shot forward like hunting hounds, their smaller profiles allowing them to achieve higher acceleration rates as they moved to intercept the fleeing aliens. The first engagement came as the destroyer USS Falcon caught up with the trailing Korthak cruiser. The alien ship opened fire with everything it had, plasma bolts and particle beams reaching out across the void. But the Falcon was ready, its point defense systems tracking and destroying incoming projectiles while its own weapons sought targets. "Direct hit on enemy vessel number 3, reported the sensor officer. "Their aft shields are down and I'm reading engine damage." Morrison watched approvingly as more destroyers joined the engagement, their coordinated fire overwhelming the alien ship's defenses. The Korthak vessel tried to return fire, but its weapons were designed for fighting single opponents, not coordinated fleet actions. The second alien ship fell victim to the heavy cruiser USS Thunderbolt, which had positioned itself directly in the enemy's escape path. The Korthak captain tried to fight his way through, but the human vessel's superior firepower quickly disabled his weapons and engines, leaving the ship drifting helplessly in space. That left the lead Korthak vessel, which had managed to put considerable distance between itself and the human fleet. Morrison could see on the tactical display that the alien ship was approaching the hyperspace limit, the invisible boundary beyond which it could escape to carry word of the human fleet to its commanders. "Range to enemy vessel 1, Morrison asked. 200,000 kilometers and increasing, Hayes replied. "At current acceleration rates, they'll reach the hyperspace limit in 14 minutes. Morrison studied the tactical situation carefully. The alien ship was fast, but it was also damaged from its earlier engagement with the Defiance. More importantly, it was being pursued by 3 human dreadnoughts, each carrying weapons systems that could reach across interplanetary distances. "Signal the Vengeance and Indomitable," Morrison ordered. "Synchronized firing pattern, target their engines with the main rail guns." The order was acknowledged, and Morrison watched as the 3 massive warships adjusted their aim. The rail cannons were humanity's most advanced kinetic weapons, capable of accelerating projectiles to 20% of light speed. At that velocity, even a small tungsten rod carried devastating kinetic energy. "Firing solution locked," Hayes reported. "Range 180,000 kilometers. All ships fire." The 3 dreadnoughts fired simultaneously, their rail cannons launching tungsten rods across the vast distance with mathematical precision. The projectiles were invisible to the naked eye, traveling too fast for human perception, but the tactical computers tracked their progress with perfect accuracy. The Korthak ship never saw them coming. The tungsten rods struck within milliseconds of each other, their combined kinetic energy overwhelming the alien vessel's rear shields and tearing through its engine compartments. The ship's acceleration dropped to 0 as secondary explosions rippled through its propulsion systems. "Target neutralized," Hayes announced. "All 3 enemy vessels are disabled and drifting." Morrison nodded with satisfaction. The engagement had lasted less than an hour, and the human fleet had suffered no casualties. It was a textbook demonstration of coordinated fleet tactics, the kind of operation that military academies would study for generations. "Signal all ships to form boarding parties," Morrison ordered. "I want prisoners for interrogation and a complete analysis of their technology, but first, let's check on our people." The communications officer established a link with the damaged Defiance, which was slowly limping toward the human fleet under escort from 2 destroyers. Captain Chen's face appeared on the main screen, her uniform torn and blood-stained, but her expression one of profound relief. "Admiral Morrison," Chen said, her voice hoarse from the battle, "I can't thank you enough. We thought we were dead." "Glad we could make it in time, Captain," Morrison replied. "Casualties?" 23 dead, 41 wounded. But we're alive, sir. That's more than we had any right to expect when this started." Morrison felt a familiar weight in his chest at the mention of casualties. 23 brave souls who had died simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, victims of an unprovoked attack by an alien race that viewed humanity as inferior. Their deaths would not be forgotten, and they would certainly not go unavenged. "Get your wounded to our medical facilities," Morrison said, "and prepare a full report on the engagement. I want to know everything about how they found you and why they attacked." "Understood, sir, but Admiral, how did you assemble this fleet so quickly? When you told me help was coming, I expected maybe a patrol vessel, not the entire human navy." Morrison smiled grimly. "That's a longer story, Captain. The truth is, we've been preparing for something like this for months. Intelligence reports suggested the Korthak were becoming more aggressive, testing our defenses. We've had battle groups positioned throughout human space, ready to respond to any incident." It wasn't the complete truth, but it wasn't a lie either. What Morrison didn't mention was the classified intelligence that had prompted the massive military buildup. 3 months ago, long-range sensors had detected Korthak fleet movements near the border systems. The aliens appeared to be massing for a large-scale invasion, something that would threaten every human colony in the Outer Rim. Earth Command's response had been swift and decisive. Every available warship had been recalled to defensive positions, new vessels had been rushed through construction and testing, and contingency plans had been activated that hadn't been touched since the last major war. The result was the most powerful military force humanity had ever fielded, ready to defend their territory against any threat. "Sir," Hayes interrupted, "boarding parties report successful captures. We have 17 Korthak prisoners and complete access to their ship systems." "Excellent," Morrison replied. "Have the prisoners transferred to the interrogation facilities aboard the Indomitable. I want to know everything about their mission orders, their fleet dispositions, and their strategic objectives." As the boarding operations continued, Morrison found himself contemplating the broader implications of the engagement. The Korthak attack on the Defiance wasn't random violence. It was a probing action, designed to test human responses and gather intelligence. The aliens had expected to destroy a single exploration vessel and disappear without consequence. Instead, They had triggered a massive military response that revealed the true extent of human naval power. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "incoming priority transmission from Earth Command." "Put it through." The holographic display flickered, showing the face of Admiral Patricia Zhang, Morrison's superior and the commander of all human military forces. Her expression was tense, and Morrison could see the stress lines around her eyes that came from dealing with galactic politics and military crises. "Jim," Zhang said without preamble, "I've been monitoring your engagement through the quantum link. Impressive work, but we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves 36 Korthak warships currently burning toward the Sigma Draconis system at maximum acceleration. Long-range sensors picked them up 20 minutes ago. They'll be there in 18 hours. Morrison felt his blood run cold. 36 warships meant a full Korthak battle fleet, enough firepower to devastate entire star systems. If they were coming to Sigma Draconis, it meant the aliens knew about the engagement and were responding with overwhelming force. "Any indication of their intentions?" Morrison asked. "Given their approach vector and fleet composition, I'd say they're planning to glass every human installation in the system and probably turn your fleet into space debris. The Korthak don't like being embarrassed, Jim, and you just handed them a very public defeat." Morrison studied the tactical display, calculating distances and response times. His fleet was powerful, but against 36 enemy vessels, the odds were not favorable. They needed more ships, more firepower, or a tactical advantage that could level the playing field. "Orders, Admiral." Zhang was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing their options. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of command decisions that could affect the fate of entire civilizations. "Hold position and prepare for extended engagement. I'm dispatching every available vessel from the reserve fleets. You'll have reinforcements, but not before the Korthak arrive. You're going to have to hold the line until help arrives." "Understood," Morrison replied, though he felt the magnitude of the task ahead. "We'll be ready." As the transmission ended, Morrison turned back to the tactical display, studying the positions of his ships and the approaching enemy fleet. 127 vessels against 36 seemed like favorable odds, but Korthak warships were individually more powerful than their human counterparts. It would be a battle that tested every aspect of human military capability, from technology and tactics to courage and determination. But as Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew, all of them preparing for the fight ahead with calm professionalism, he felt a surge of confidence. The Korthak might have superior technology, but they had never faced humanity at full strength. Tomorrow would show them what human determination could accomplish when backed by proper firepower. The enemy had anticipated reinforcements arriving to help a single damaged exploration vessel. What they would find instead was the entire might of the human navy, ready to defend their territory and protect their people. The aliens wanted a fight, and humanity was prepared to give them one they would never forget. The bridge of the UES Retribution hummed with intense activity as Admiral Morrison's staff worked through the night, preparing for what would likely be the largest space battle in human history. Holographic displays showed fleet formations, supply logistics, and tactical scenarios, while officers moved between stations with the focused urgency of people who knew lives depended on their decisions. "Status report from all squadron commanders," Morrison requested, settling into his command chair with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The past 12 hours had been a whirlwind of preparation, reorganization, and strategic planning. Commander Hayes looked up from his tactical station, where he'd been coordinating with the fleet's other dreadnoughts. "Sir, all vessels report combat ready. The damaged ships from yesterday's engagement have completed emergency repairs. Ammunition stores are at full capacity, and all weapon systems are showing green across the board." Morrison nodded, but his expression remained troubled. The numbers looked good on paper, but he'd been studying Korthak military doctrine for most of his career, and he knew what was coming. The aliens didn't just send battle fleets. They sent overwhelming force designed to crush any opposition through sheer firepower. "What's our current intelligence on the approaching enemy fleet?" he asked, turning to the intelligence officer who'd been analyzing the sensor data streaming in from long-range reconnaissance drones. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Park, on loan from Fleet Intelligence, stood beside a holographic display showing the enemy formation. Sir, we're tracking 36 Korthak vessels in total. 12 heavy battle cruisers, 18 destroyers, and 6 vessels we're having trouble classifying. They're larger than anything in our database, possibly a new class of warship. Morrison studied the enemy formation with growing concern. The 12 battle cruisers alone would present a serious challenge to his fleet, each one carrying enough firepower to threaten a human dreadnought. The 18 destroyers would provide speed and tactical flexibility, while the 6 unknown vessels represented the worst kind of variable in military planning. Time to contact. 16 hours, 23 minutes at their current acceleration, Park replied. They're not trying to be stealthy. Admiral, they're broadcasting on multiple frequencies, demanding our surrender and the return of their captured personnel. Any indication they're willing to negotiate? Park's expression darkened. Sir, the translations we're getting suggest they consider this an act of war. They're referring to our defense of the Defiance as unprovoked aggression against Korthak expansion forces. According to their communications, we should have allowed them to complete their mission. Morrison felt anger building in his chest. The aliens had ambushed a peaceful exploration vessel, killed 23 human beings, and now claimed that defending against their attack was an act of war. It was typical Korthak logic, the kind of twisted reasoning that had made them enemies of half the galaxy. Have we heard anything from the other human fleets? Morrison asked, turning to his communications officer. Yes, sir, came the reply from Commander Lisa Park, Sarah's sister and the ship's senior communications specialist. Admiral Zhang reports that the 2nd and 5th fleets are en route, but they won't arrive for another 36 hours. The 4th fleet is engaging Korthak forces near the Centauri system and can't break off. We're on our own until the reinforcements arrive. Morrison absorbed this information with the calm that came from years of command experience. 36 hours meant they would have to survive the initial engagement without support, holding the system against superior numbers until help arrived. It was far from impossible, but it would require every advantage they could create. Signal all ship commanders to report to the Retribution for a tactical briefing, Morrison ordered. We need to coordinate our approach down to the minute. This isn't going to be won by individual heroics. Over the next several hours, the conference room aboard the Retribution filled with the commanding officers of humanity's assembled fleet. Ship captains, squadron leaders, and tactical specialists crowded around a massive holographic display showing the Sigma Draconis system in 3 dimensions. Morrison stood at the center, pointing out key features of their planned defensive strategy. The enemy will most likely approach from the outer system, Morrison explained, highlighting the probable attack vector. Their standard doctrine is to overwhelm defenders with concentrated firepower, relying on their superior technology to carry the day. We're going to use that doctrine against them. Captain Maria Santos of the heavy cruiser Thunderbolt raised her hand. Admiral, what kind of tactical advantage are we talking about? Their individual ships outgun ours significantly. Morrison smiled grimly. That's true, Captain, but they've never faced coordinated human fleet tactics. Our advantage lies in integration, communication, and adaptability. Korthak commanders are trained to operate as individual units, each seeking personal glory. We fight as a unified force. The briefing continued for hours as Morrison outlined their strategy in detail. The human fleet would be divided into 3 task forces, each with specific roles in the coming battle. The first force, built around the Dreadnoughts, would engage the enemy head-on, drawing their attention and absorbing the initial assault. The second force, composed of fast cruisers and destroyers, would execute flanking maneuvers designed to exploit gaps in the Korthak formation. The third force would remain in reserve, ready to reinforce success or cover retreat. The key to this plan, Morrison emphasized, is timing and communication. Every ship must execute its assigned role precisely, or the entire strategy falls apart. Questions. Captain Jennifer Walsh of the destroyer Falcon spoke up. Sir, what about the 6 unknown vessels? Without knowing their capabilities, how do we plan for them? It was a good question, one that Morrison had been grappling with since the intelligence briefing. Unknown capabilities represented the greatest threat in space combat, where a single technological advantage could tip the balance of an entire battle. We'll assign the reserve force to monitor and counter those vessels, Morrison replied. Once we determine their function, we can adapt accordingly. Flexibility will be crucial. As the briefing concluded and the ship commanders returned to their vessels, Morrison found himself alone with his senior staff, reviewing the final preparations. The fleet had been repositioned according to the tactical plan, with each task force in position to execute its assigned mission. Ammunition had been distributed, damage control teams had been briefed, and every system had been checked and double-checked. "Admiral," Commander Hayes said quietly, "the crew is asking about casualty estimates. They want to know what they're facing." Morrison considered the question carefully. His staff had run computer simulations of the coming battle, using every piece of intelligence they had about Korthak tactics and technology. The results had been sobering, even under the most optimistic scenarios. "Tell them the truth," Morrison replied. "We're facing a superior force with better individual ships and more experience in large-scale combat. We're going to take losses, possibly heavy ones, but we're also fighting for something they'll never understand." "Sir?" "The Korthak fight for conquest, for the glory of their empire and their personal advancement. We're fighting for our homes, our families, and the right to exist as free beings in this galaxy. That's an advantage no amount of technology can overcome." As the final hours before contact ticked away, Morrison made his way through the ship, visiting different stations and talking with the crew. In engineering, he found teams of technicians fine-tuning the reactor systems that would power their weapons in the coming battle. In the medical bay, doctors and nurses were preparing for the wounded that would inevitably result from the engagement. In the fighter bays, pilots were conducting final checks on their craft, ready to launch when the order came. Everywhere he went, Morrison saw the same thing: men and women who understood the magnitude of what they faced, but who were determined to do their duty regardless of the cost. They were afraid, certainly, but they were also resolute in their purpose. They represented the best of humanity, and Morrison felt proud to command them. "Admiral," came a voice over the ship's intercom, "long-range sensors are picking up new contacts. The enemy fleet has arrived at the edge of the system." Morrison made his way back to the bridge, where the tactical displays were already updating with fresh intelligence about the approaching Korthak force. The enemy ships were arranged in a classic assault formation, with the heavy battle cruisers in the center and the faster destroyers spread wide to prevent flanking maneuvers. "Range?" Morrison asked. 8 million kilometers and closing," Hayes replied. "They're maintaining a steady approach, no evasive maneuvers. Estimated time to weapons range, 4 hours. Morrison studied the enemy formation, looking for any signs of tactical innovation or unexpected changes to their standard doctrine. But the Korthak were following their usual playbook, relying on superior firepower to overwhelm their opponents. It was exactly what Morrison had hoped for. "Signal all ships," Morrison commanded. "Execute formation Delta 7. All task forces move to assigned positions." The human fleet began to shift and spread across the outer system, each ship moving to predetermined coordinates with mathematical precision. The first task force, centered around the 3 dreadnoughts, maintained position near the primary shipping lanes, offering an obvious target for the approaching enemy. The second task force spread wide, using the cover of asteroid fields and debris clouds to mask their movements. The reserve force held position near the inner system, ready to respond to any development. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "the Korthak fleet is broadcasting again. They're demanding immediate surrender and threatening to execute all prisoners if we don't comply within 1 hour." Morrison felt his jaw tighten. The threat against prisoners was typical Korthak psychological warfare, designed to demoralize their opponents before battle was joined. But the aliens had made a critical error in their calculations. They assumed that humanity would be paralyzed by fear, that the threat of casualties would prevent effective resistance. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Open a channel to the enemy fleet," Morrison ordered. "All frequencies, maximum power." The communications officer worked at her station for several moments before nodding. "Channel open, sir." Morrison stood before the main display, knowing that his words would be heard not just by the enemy commanders, but by every human in the system. This was a moment that would be remembered in history, the point where humanity declared its intention to stand and fight regardless of the odds. "This is Admiral James Morrison, commanding the United Earth Navy Fleet in the Sigma Draconis system," he began, his voice carrying across space to the approaching enemy. "You have attacked our vessels without provocation, murdered our people without cause, and now threaten the execution of prisoners in violation of every civilized law of war. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. We reject your demands for surrender, we reject your threats against our people, and we reject your claim to this system or any other space under human protection. If you want to fight, you'll get one. But understand this, you're not facing a single exploration vessel now. You're facing the full might of humanity, and we don't know how to quit. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what had just been said. Morrison had essentially declared war on one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, committing humanity to a fight that would determine the future of their species. All ships report ready for combat, Hayes announced. Enemy fleet is maintaining approach. Time to weapons range, 3 hours, 42 minutes. Morrison nodded, settling back into his command chair as the final preparations were completed around him. The next few hours would test everything humanity had learned about warfare in space, every technological advancement they had made, every tactical innovation they had developed. The Korthak had come expecting to face a beaten enemy, demoralized by the loss of their exploration vessel, and ready to surrender rather than fight. Instead, they would find an enemy that had spent months preparing for exactly this moment, an enemy that had turned their aggression into the trigger for the largest military response in human history. The aliens wanted to test humanity's resolve. They were about to get their answer, delivered in tungsten shells and fusion fire across the darkness of space. The first shots of the Battle of Sigma Draconis were fired at 14:37 ship time, when the lead Korthak battlecruiser opened up with its primary plasma cannons at maximum range. The brilliant blue-white bolts streaked across 6 million kilometers of space, their targeting computers calculating intercept courses for the human dreadnoughts that waited in the shipping lanes. Admiral Morrison watched the incoming fire on his tactical display, noting the precision and power of the alien weapons. Each plasma bolt carried enough energy to vaporize a city block, and the Korthak were firing them in coordinated salvos designed to overwhelm point defense systems. Evasive maneuvers pattern Alpha, Morrison commanded. All ships execute defensive fire. The 3 human dreadnoughts began a carefully choreographed dance, their massive hulls moving with surprising grace as they avoided the incoming plasma bolts. Point defense systems came online, filling space with defensive fire that intercepted and destroyed the enemy projectiles in brilliant flashes of light. But this was just the opening exchange. The real battle would begin when the fleets closed to effective range, where the massive firepower of both sides could be brought to bear with devastating effect. Enemy fleet is adjusting course, reported Commander Hayes, monitoring the tactical situation from his station. They're concentrating their formation, preparing for a direct assault on our primary task force. Morrison nodded, watching as the Korthak ships moved into their classic attack formation. 12 heavy battlecruisers formed the center, their weapons trained on the human dreadnoughts. 18 destroyers spread wide on both flanks, ready to exploit any breakthrough in the human defensive line. And behind them came the 6 unknown vessels, their purpose still unclear but their energy signatures ominous. Signal Task Force 2, Morrison ordered. Execute flanking maneuver Gamma. Task Force 3, maintain reserve position but prepare for immediate deployment. Across the outer system, the human fleet began to move. Task Force 2, composed of fast cruisers and destroyers, broke from concealment among the asteroid fields and began a wide sweeping movement designed to hit the enemy formation from the side. Task Force 3, held in reserve near the inner planets, adjusted position to respond to any breakthrough or emergency. The Korthak commanders noticed the flanking movement immediately, their formation adjusting to counter the threat. But their response revealed exactly what Morrison had hoped to see. Despite their advanced technology, the aliens still thought in terms of individual ship actions rather than coordinated fleet movements. Range to primary targets? Morrison asked. 4 million kilometers and closing, Hayes replied. Estimated time to effective weapons range, 18 minutes. 18 minutes to prepare for the largest space battle in human history. Morrison used the time to review his tactical displays one final time, checking the positioning of every ship in his fleet. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and perfect execution, but it represented humanity's best chance against superior numbers and technology. Admiral, the communications officer called out. "I'm receiving transmissions from the unknown Korthak vessels. The computer is having trouble with the translation, but it appears to be some kind of ritual chant or battle cry." Morrison frowned. Ritual chants suggested that the 6 unknown ships might serve a ceremonial or religious function, perhaps carrying important personnel or artifacts. If that was true, they might represent high-value targets that could disrupt enemy morale if destroyed. "Continue monitoring those transmissions," Morrison ordered. "Any intelligence we can gather might prove useful." The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness as the two fleets approached each other across the void. On both sides, weapon systems came online, targeting computers locked onto enemy vessels, and crew members prepared for the violence that would soon engulf them all. At 3 million kilometers, the Korthak fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles streaked across space in a coordinated barrage designed to cripple the human dreadnoughts before they could respond effectively. The volume of fire was overwhelming, a continuous stream of deadly energy that turned the space between the fleets into a hellish landscape of destruction. "Incoming fire all vectors," Hayes announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the assault. "Point defense systems engaging." The human dreadnoughts disappeared behind clouds of defensive fire as their point defense systems worked to intercept the incoming barrage. Pulse lasers and particle beams reached out to destroy enemy projectiles, while electronic warfare systems attempted to disrupt targeting computers and navigation systems. But some shots got through. The UES Vengeance shuddered as a plasma bolt struck its forward shields, the energy barrier flaring brilliant white before stabilizing. The UES Indomitable took a direct hit from a kinetic projectile, the tungsten rod punching through weakened armor to cause internal explosions that vented atmosphere and debris into space. "Vengeance reports shield strength down to 60%, Hayes called out. "Indomitable has hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, casualty reports coming in from both ships." Morrison felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settle on his shoulders. Every casualty was someone under his command, someone who trusted him to use their lives wisely in defense of humanity. He couldn't let their sacrifice be meaningless. "All ships return fire," Morrison commanded. "Target the lead battlecruisers, concentrated fire, synchronized salvos." The human dreadnoughts responded with devastating fury. Their main rail guns fired tungsten projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, while missile tubes launched fusion warheads and particle beam arrays added their own deadly contribution to the barrage. The combined firepower of 3 dreadnoughts, directed at a single target, was enough to test even Korthak defensive technology. The lead enemy battlecruiser took the full force of the human response, its shields flaring and failing under the concentrated assault. Secondary explosions rippled through its hull as armor plating was torn away and internal systems were destroyed. Within seconds, the massive alien vessel was drifting powerless, its weapons offline and its crew struggling to contain the damage. "Direct hit on target Alpha 1, Hayes reported with satisfaction. "Enemy vessel is disabled and drifting, minimal energy output, no weapons fire detected." Morrison allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but he knew the battle was far from over. The Korthak had 11 other battlecruisers, plus 18 destroyers and the 6 mysterious vessels that had yet to reveal their function. One disabled ship, while encouraging, wouldn't change the overall tactical situation. "Task Force 2, report status," Morrison requested. The response came from Captain Santos aboard the Thunderbolt, her voice crackling with static from the electromagnetic interference created by the weapon's fire. "Task Force 2 is in position for flanking attack. We have targeting solutions on 6 enemy destroyers, ready to engage on your command." "Execute attack pattern Delta," Morrison ordered. "Hit them hard and fast, then withdraw before they can concentrate fire on your position." Across the battlefield, Task Force 2 struck like lightning. The human cruisers and destroyers emerged from cover among the asteroids, their weapons already locked onto the enemy destroyer formation. Surprise was complete, and the coordinated human attack devastated the Korthak flank guard. 3 enemy destroyers died in the first 30 seconds of the engagement, their hulls torn apart by human weapons fire. 2 more were disabled, their engines destroyed and their weapons offline. The surviving destroyer managed to escape, but only after taking severe damage that left it barely operational. The Korthak response was swift and brutal. The main enemy formation wheeled around to engage Task Force 2, bringing the full power of their battle cruisers to bear on the smaller human ships. Morrison watched with growing concern as enemy fire concentrated on Captain Santos's vessels, the volume of plasma bolts and particle beams threatening to overwhelm their defenses. Task Force 2, immediate withdrawal, Morrison commanded. Get out of there before they mass fire on your position. Santos's ships were already moving, using their superior speed and maneuverability to break contact before the enemy could bring their full firepower to bear. But the withdrawal came at a cost. The destroyer USS Falcon took multiple hits, its hull torn open and its crew fighting desperately to contain the damage. The cruiser New York lost main engine power and had to be towed clear by her sister ships. Falcon is reporting heavy casualties, the communications officer announced. They're requesting immediate medical assistance. Morrison felt anger building in his chest. Every ship lost, every life sacrificed, brought them closer to defeat unless the battle could be turned in humanity's favor. He needed something to break the deadlock, some tactical advantage that could offset the enemy's superior numbers and firepower. "Sir," Hayes called out suddenly, "I'm reading massive energy spikes from the 6 unknown Korthak vessels. Whatever they are, they're powering up." Morrison studied the tactical display with growing concern. The mysterious ships had remained passive throughout the engagement, but now they were showing energy signatures that dwarfed even the battle cruisers. If they were some kind of super weapon, their activation could spell doom for the human fleet. "All available sensors on those vessels," Morrison ordered. "I need to know what we're dealing with." The answer came within minutes, as the 6 unknown ships began to change configuration. Hull sections retracted, revealing massive weapon systems unlike anything in the human database. Energy began to build within the alien vessels, reaching levels that suggested weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. "Sir," the sensor officer announced, his voice filled with awe and terror, "those aren't ships. They're mobile weapons platforms. The energy readings suggest they're charging some kind of directed energy weapon with planet-killing capability." Morrison felt ice in his veins. Planet killers were theoretical weapons, so powerful that their use would constitute genocide on an interstellar scale. If the Korthak were willing to deploy such weapons, it meant they viewed this engagement as more than just a local conflict. They were preparing to eliminate humanity as a spacefaring species. "Time to full charge?" Morrison asked. "Approximately 12 minutes, came the reply. 12 minutes to find a way to stop 6 weapons that could sterilize entire worlds. Morrison's mind raced through the tactical possibilities, searching for some way to neutralize the threat before it could be unleashed. Conventional weapons wouldn't be enough. The platforms were too heavily defended and too powerful to destroy through normal means. But there was one possibility, a desperate gambit that might succeed if executed with perfect timing and absolute commitment. Morrison had hoped to avoid it, knowing the cost would be enormous, but with planet killers charging their weapons, he had no choice. "Signal Task Force 3, Morrison commanded, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would determine the fate of humanity. "Execute Operation Overlord, all ships, maximum acceleration toward the enemy weapons platforms." Around the bridge, Morrison's staff exchanged glances of understanding and fear. Operation Overlord was their final contingency plan, a coordinated ramming attack designed to destroy enemy vessels through pure kinetic impact. It was a suicide mission for the ships involved, but it might be the only way to stop the planet killers before they could fire. "Sir," Hayes said quietly, "are you certain? Once we commit to this course, there's no going back." Morrison looked around the bridge one final time, seeing the faces of men and women who had served with distinction and honor throughout the battle. They deserved better than a suicide mission, but they also deserved a chance for their species to survive what was coming. "I'm certain," Morrison replied. "Signal all ships, this is for Earth, this is for humanity, this is for everyone we've ever loved." Task Force 3 began its final approach toward the Korthak weapons platforms, their crews knowing that they were flying into certain death, but doing so willingly, because it was the only way to protect everything they held dear. Behind them, the rest of the human fleet continued its desperate battle against impossible odds, buying time for heroes to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Battle of Sigma Draconis had reached its climax, and the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. Admiral Morrison watched with grim pride as Task Force 3 accelerated toward the charging Korthak weapons platforms, their crews committed to a mission that would save countless lives at the cost of their own. 23 ships, including 2 heavy cruisers and a support carrier, racing across space at maximum burn toward targets that could obliterate planets. Time to impact, 4 minutes 30 seconds, Commander Hayes announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The weapons platforms are attempting evasive maneuvers, but their size is working against them. Morrison nodded, studying the tactical display. The Korthak weapons platforms were indeed massive, each one the size of a small moon and bristling with defensive systems. But their sheer bulk made them slow to maneuver, and the approaching human ships had the advantage of speed and surprise. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "Captain Rodriguez of Task Force 3 is requesting permission to address the fleet." "Put him through," Morrison replied. The main screen flickered to show Captain Miguel Rodriguez, commander of the heavy cruiser Santiago and leader of the suicide mission. His face was calm, almost serene, despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Rodriguez. On behalf of Task Force 3, I want to say it's been an honor serving under your command. Tell our families we died free, and tell Earth that humanity never learned how to quit." Morrison felt tears streaming down his face as he watched the bravest people he'd ever known racing towards certain death. "The honor has been mine, Captain. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Your names will live forever." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence as everyone watched the tactical display. The human ships were closing rapidly on the weapons platforms, their point defense systems engaging the defensive fire that reached out to stop them. Ships began to die, torn apart by alien weapons, but the survivors pressed on. 2 minutes to impact, Hayes announced. Platform defensive fire is intensifying. Morrison could see the space between the human ships and their targets filling with deadly energy. Plasma bolts, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles created a wall of destruction that seemed impossible to penetrate. Ship after ship was destroyed, their crews vaporized in brilliant flashes of light. But they kept coming. For every ship destroyed, another took its place. For every hero who died, another stepped forward to complete the mission. The Santiago took a direct hit from a plasma cannon that tore away half her hull, but Rodriguez kept her on course even as her superstructure collapsed around him. 1 minute to impact, Hayes reported. I count 11 ships still operational and on target. 11 ships out of 23, their hulls scarred and burning, but their crews determined to complete their final mission. Morrison watched with a mixture of pride and heartbreak as these brave souls approached their destiny, knowing that their sacrifice would echo through history. The first impact came at exactly 14:58 ship time, when the destroyer USS Phoenix struck the lead weapons platform at 20% of light speed. The kinetic energy release was visible across the solar system, a brilliant flash of light that marked the destruction of both vessels. But the platform's weapon systems were offline, its charging sequence interrupted by the devastating impact. Within seconds, the other human ships struck their targets. The Santiago, with Captain Rodriguez at the helm, plowed through the defensive fire of a second platform to deliver a killing blow that split the massive structure in half. The cruiser Boston sacrificed herself to destroy a third platform, her crew singing the Star-Spangled Banner over the comm system as they approached impact. All targets destroyed, Hayes announced, his voice filled with awe. 6 weapons platforms eliminated, planet-killer threat neutralized. Morrison felt a surge of fierce pride, but he knew the battle was far from over. The sacrifice of Task Force 3 had eliminated the immediate threat to human worlds, but 24 Korthak warships still remained in the system, their commanders no doubt enraged by the destruction of their super weapons. Enemy fleet is regrouping, the tactical officer reported. They're consolidating their formation and preparing for another assault. Looks like they're targeting our primary task force directly. Morrison studied the tactical situation with calculating eyes. His fleet had been reduced to 96 operational vessels, while the enemy still had 11 battle cruisers and 13 destroyers. The odds were more favorable now, but the Korthak ships still possessed superior individual firepower and defensive capabilities. "Signal all ships," Morrison commanded. "Formation Charlie 7, we're going to meet them head-on." The surviving human ships began to move into attack formation, their crews inspired by the heroic sacrifice of their comrades. The three dreadnoughts formed the center of the formation, their massive guns trained on the approaching enemy. Cruisers and destroyers spread wide on both flanks, ready to exploit any weakness in the alien formation. The second major engagement began at 15 ship time, when both fleets opened fire simultaneously at a range of 2 million kilometers. The space between them became a hellscape of energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, each side pouring everything they had into the destruction of their enemies. But something had changed in the human fleet. The sacrifice of Task Force 3 had ignited something primal in the survivors, a fury that transcended tactical doctrine and military discipline. Ship commanders took risks they would never have considered before, pressing attacks home with suicidal determination. Captain Sarah Park of the destroyer Falcon, her ship patched and repaired from earlier damage, led a squadron of destroyers in a knife-fighting engagement that took them directly into the enemy formation. Her ships danced between the massive alien battlecruisers, their smaller size allowing them to avoid the concentrated fire while striking at vulnerable points. "This is Falcon," Park's voice crackled over the comm system. "We're inside their formation, targeting command and control systems. All ships follow us in." The human destroyers tore through the enemy formation like sharks in a feeding frenzy, their weapon systems focused on crippling rather than destroying. Bridge sections were targeted, engine compartments were hit, and communication arrays were systematically eliminated. Within minutes, the coordinated Korthak formation began to break down as individual ships lost contact with their commanders. "Enemy coordination is breaking down," Hayes reported with satisfaction. "Multiple battlecruisers are operating independently. Their formation integrity is compromised." Morrison seized the opportunity immediately. "All dreadnoughts, concentrated fire on target Bravo 3, take out their command ship." The three human dreadnoughts focused their massive firepower on a single Korthak battlecruiser that had been directing the enemy formation. Rail guns, particle beams, and missile salvos converged on the target with devastating effect. The alien vessel's shields failed within seconds, and its hull was torn apart by the concentrated assault. The death of their command ship sent shockwaves through the remaining Korthak forces. Without central coordination, their disciplined formation dissolved into individual ships fighting for survival rather than following a coherent battle plan. The human fleet pressed their advantage, using superior tactics and coordination to defeat enemies that outgunned them individually. "Sir," the communications officer announced suddenly, "I'm picking up multiple hyperspace signatures, large vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system." Morrison felt his heart skip a beat. If more Korthak reinforcements were arriving, the battle would be lost despite their recent success. His fleet was already battered and reduced, in no condition to face fresh enemy forces. "Identification?" Morrison asked, trying to keep the concern out of his voice. The sensor officer worked frantically at his station, trying to clean up the readings through the electromagnetic interference of the ongoing battle. "Sir, they're human ships, multiple human battle groups, over 200 vessels. It's the 2nd and 5th fleets arriving ahead of schedule." Morrison felt relief wash over him like a tidal wave. Admiral Zhang had promised reinforcements, but they weren't supposed to arrive for another 20 hours. Their early arrival could only mean one thing: they had pushed their engines beyond safe limits to reach the battle in time. "Signal the new arrivals," Morrison commanded. "Tactical coordination, immediate implementation. We have the enemy outnumbered now." The arrival of the human reinforcements transformed the tactical situation completely. The Korthak fleet, already battered and demoralized, suddenly found themselves facing over 300 human warships. Their commanders, trained in the doctrine of overwhelming force, recognized an untenable situation when they saw one. "Sir," Hayes reported, "the remaining enemy vessels are attempting to withdraw. They're heading for the hyperspace limit at maximum acceleration." Morrison considered his options carefully. The smart tactical decision would be to let them go, to avoid unnecessary casualties in pursuit of a defeated enemy. But these were the same aliens who had planned to use planet-killing weapons against human worlds, who had shown no mercy to the crew of the Defiance. "All ships," Morrison announced over the fleet communication system, "pursue and engage. No Korthak vessel leaves this system alive." The massive human fleet surged forward in pursuit, their ships spreading wide to prevent any enemy vessel from escaping. The chase lasted for 6 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. One by one, the surviving Korthak ships were hunted down and destroyed, their crews paying the ultimate price for their attempt to intimidate humanity. The last enemy vessel, a lone destroyer that had almost reached the hyperspace limit, was destroyed by a perfectly placed shot from the Dreadnought UES Indomitable. As the alien ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, silence fell across the Sigma Draconis system for the first time in over 12 hours. "All enemy vessels destroyed," Hayes reported. "The system is secure." Morrison slumped back in his command chair, suddenly feeling every hour of the past day. The Battle of Sigma Draconis was over. Humanity had won a complete victory, but the cost had been enormous. Task Force 3 was gone, along with hundreds of other brave souls who had given their lives in defense of their species. "Casualty report?" Morrison asked quietly. Hayes consulted his tactical display, his expression somber. "Total human losses: 47 vessels destroyed, 38 damaged. Crew casualties are still being compiled, but preliminary estimates suggest over 12,000 dead or missing. 12,000 lives lost in a single battle." Morrison felt the weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Each of those casualties was someone who had trusted him to use their life wisely, someone who had believed in the cause they were fighting for. But they had won. Against impossible odds, facing superior technology and overwhelming firepower, humanity had stood and fought and emerged victorious. The Korthak Empire had learned that humans were not the helpless prey they had assumed, but a species capable of defending itself with deadly effectiveness. "Sir," the communications officer announced, "incoming transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Zhang wants to speak with you." Morrison straightened in his chair, preparing to brief his superior on the battle and its outcome. But first, he had other duties to perform, obligations to the living and the dead that took precedence over military protocol. "Signal all ships," Morrison commanded. "Stand down from battle stations, begin search and rescue operations for survivors from destroyed vessels, and prepare a full honors ceremony for the heroes of Task Force 3. Their sacrifice saved us all." As the human fleet began the grim work of counting their losses and honoring their dead, news of the victory spread throughout human space. The Battle of Sigma Draconis became an instant legend, the moment when humanity proved it belonged among the great powers of the galaxy. The Korthak Empire, for their part, would never again underestimate human resolve. They had come to Sigma Draconis expecting to crush a minor species with overwhelming force. Instead, they had discovered that humanity was capable of the same ruthless determination that had made them masters of their own small corner of the galaxy. They had anticipated reinforcements arriving to help a single damaged exploration vessel. What they received instead was a demonstration of human military might that would echo through history, a warning to any species that thought humanity would submit quietly to conquest or intimidation. The stars themselves had witnessed humanity's declaration of independence, written in fire and steel across the darkness of space. And in the years to come, when other alien empires considered testing human resolve, they would remember what happened at Sigma Draconis and think twice about challenging a species that simply didn't know how to quit.